I'm trying to find how to stop recording. Oh, it's on the top. Okay.
I have not gotten a promotion for 15 years
Oof.
because my boss doesn't think I have good communication skills. I said, that's incredible. I have this job, I make this much. It's this great company.
Yeah.
And I was looking for external validation from them in those moments. And I
Mm,
realized that even when I got it, I still felt empty. And that's when I realized
that hurt.
I'm living someone else's life.
Yeah.
So that's why fear was one of the largest roadblocks for me that stopped me from getting to that goal. I had a lot of imposter syndrome, as I
Mm.
did when I started in the data industry as well.
How does communication tie into confidence? Can you communicate well without feeling confident?
I recently put out an image, I can send it to you
Mm.
as well, where
Thanks.
it's this kind of flywheel and it goes confidence and competence and this going around and around. So
Yeah.
where do you start? And my response is you start with
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Success Beyond Our Greatest Fear. And I'm your host, Sonali Kumar. And today I'm very excited about our guest today. He is someone who's created a name for himself in the communication space, specifically for tech professional. He is a communication coach, also known as the hidden speaker. I love the name so much. And some of you may already know him from his LinkedIn content. And I cannot wait to learn more about him and share his story today with you guys. Please help me welcome Christopher Chin. Chris, it's so great to have you today.
thanks so much, Sonali, for the opportunity. And yeah,
Yeah.
I work as a communication coach for tech professionals. I spent the majority of my career in the data industry. So right there, I said data instead of data. So I worked the majority of my career in the data industry. I did data visualizations and reports and storytelling. And I realized that something that's often missing in professional development is soft skill training. In school or in graduate school or on the job, we learn how to program, how to create dashboards, how to learn new programming languages. But rarely, if ever, are we taught how to speak
Mm.
well and confidently. And I thought this is such a gap in the industry and a critical skill for leadership. And I said, I'll make it my mission to help empower tech professionals as much as I can to learn these skills so they can prepare themselves for their future careers.
I think you hit it right, right on point, saying that there are so many resources out there that are teaching you how to learn the hard skill, teaching you how to code, and all of that. They don't tell you how to execute. And by that I mean present your findings. They don't teach you how to communicate your findings to a non-technical audience. And you're right, I've noticed that gap, especially when I was trying to transition into the field too, that I can do all that behind the scene, put work with Excel, work with SQL, or any kind of data visualization tool, and I'm putting it all together. And when it comes to presenting it to someone, I'm hitting a wall because I don't know. I feel like, how do I present this in a most effective way? How do I make sure I'm getting the point across? Because I've put so much work into this. All that work will kind of go to waste if the stakeholders don't understand what I'm trying to say, or they don't understand the importance of the findings. So I think the work that you've done, or that you continue doing, I've said this and I will continue to say it. I admire it and I love it
Thank
so
you.
much. And I do stalk your profile here and there just to learn more. Just a side note. So I'm actually very excited to ask you more questions about communication. And one of the things I actually wanted to ask, and you kind of already hit it, why did you decide to pursue this, the coaching, especially with communication? And I wanted to dig a little deeper into your background, which I think is very unique when it comes to someone who studied music in
Right.
college, went into data, and then became a communication expert, I'm going to say, in the data space. So tell me a little bit more about that transition and how did you get here?
In an interesting way, I feel like I've made a full circle journey by approaching communication coaching now
Yeah.
because I realize in retrospect that my career has always been about storytelling, just in different
Mm,
forms. In music, I told stories through sound and usually accompanied by film. And with data, I focused on telling stories based on all this raw information organizations possess, how they can use it to make it
mm.
actionable. And finally, now I'm here teaching data communication and presentation skills in a different way, helping others tell their stories. And I feel this has been the calling I've been trying to find for so
Mm.
long, this perfect space. I believe the Japanese term for it is ikigai, where it's the intersection of what you're good at, what you can make money in, what the world needs, and what makes you most fulfilled. And this
Mm,
is really that space I believe I found. And as you mentioned, I started in music because my very first aspiration was to be a business owner just in
mm.
that field. So my ultimate dream back then was to become a famous film composer one day in Hollywood. So for all the big
Wow,
blockbuster movies, I would write the scores for them. That was the dream.
that's
I didn't end up
amazing.
getting there, but
Yet, not
and
yet.
this not yet, not yet.
Yes.
And it speaks to the theme of this podcast, which is fear was one of the largest roadblocks for me that stopped me from getting to that goal. I had a lot of imposter syndrome, as I
Mm,
did when I started in the data industry as well. I, in music, compared myself to all my peers. I studied it in college, and for that reason, it was very easy to compare myself to fellow students. They were so much more successful,
yeah.
apparently. They were so much more skilled, apparently. They were in so many more social groups and winning these competitions and
Mm,
in the short films themselves. And what was I doing?
mm,
And I was, I'd say, marginally successful in freelancing myself around and creating scores for short films, but I felt like I didn't reach the level of success that I saw they had. And that was the metric I was evaluating myself
mm,
against. And push come to shove, I decided, all right, I don't think this is working. I need to find something else
mm.
to create a stable financial career. And I found data to be this space where I could learn it all on my own. I didn't have to go back to school. And
That's
it let me
huge.
still be creative. Yeah, exactly. It's so much money to invest
Yeah.
in programs sometimes, but for data, I could just create my own portfolio
Yeah.
and share it. And I proved my worth. And I got my very first job just through that. And I really am thankful and grateful I found this space because it welcomes people from such diverse backgrounds.
It really does. Yeah.
And in the data space, I tapped into that creativity. One of the reasons I was hired for my first position was the hiring manager said, "You show so much great promise and unique vision through the projects in your portfolio. I think you do a great job here doing just that."
Mm,
And I tapped into that at various points throughout my career as well. I always try to think outside of the box. How can I make this more impactful, more engaging? Always tying back to things I learned and enhanced in my music career, how to
mm-hmm,
engage an audience, how to make sure that I tell a story in just the right way, that it hits the
mm-hmm,
right emotions. And eventually I reached where I am here. I realized that I wanted to do something that touched people more closely than I had working in data. In data, I would create dashboards, I would create products, but I wasn't really helping people directly as I used to with music. And with music, I could see their reaction when I
mm,
performed something or when they heard something I composed. But in data, it was often behind the desk, away from that impact. And I said, I really would enjoy helping people more.
yeah.
And I said, this coaching space that I found, this training space where I teach these soft skills, communication, presentation, storytelling, that's really the domain that I feel is really sits right with me and that people need and that I feel I can make a great impact in.
That was beautiful. And I remember hearing your story when we first connected, and you had mentioned that you did music. And in my head, I was wondering, I'm like, how did that all, come together? And how did you go from music to the data? And like hearing you speak of it again, and I can see the passion that you hold for the current space that you're in. And you're right, as I was preparing for this interview and doing research and stalking you, this is all that kept playing in my head. It's like, oh, you went full circle. You went from trying to engage with your audience to music. Now you're engaging with your audience and creating stories, not creating, but presenting stories and helping your audience present their own voice and find their own voice in their space. And so many things that you mentioned. I was taking notes. And one of the main things that you mentioned in the beginning was the ikigai. And you're the second person to mention this on this podcast. And the person I interviewed before had mentioned brought up the similar concept and how important that is to find, what you enjoy and what your North Star is going to be in that moment. And one thing I really liked is your North Star changed
Mm-hmm.
in a way, like how you got there changed. Not necessarily that you still wanted to make an impact, that you still wanted to run a business, but you weren't afraid to make the pivot. However, fear was one factor that forced you to make that pivot, which is very, very interesting. So I guess what's one thing that you learned, and what's one thing, if anything, stuck out to you, any of the feelings that still linger with you when you left the music industry to pursue data, just because it seems like you pursued it for stability, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
any other main reasons.
It was in large part due to stability, and
Mm,
also because it fascinated me how you could create such great products so quickly.
hmm.
Prior to, in between music and data, I actually had a little extra step, which was acoustic engineering. I
Oh,
studied
wow.
that in graduate school. That was my original stable job.
Hmm.
And the reason why I chose acoustic engineering is because it was the closest engineering field to music I could find. So it was
Yeah.
remotely interesting to me. And in that field, I worked in architecture. So I designed spaces to maximize the sound. So, for example, in a
Oh, wow.
classroom, making sure the teacher can be heard all the way in the back, or in a concert hall, making sure all the instruments can be heard all the way in the back. And it sometimes was frustrating for me working in that domain because
Mm.
architecture takes so long to complete. And what I loved about data and computer science and those kinds of subjects was it could be so fast. I could create a program that counts from 1 to 5 in 5 seconds and it's done. And there's that instant gratification that I really found interesting about it.
Yeah.
But going back to your earlier question about what I learned along that very tumultuous journey I took was it's more important to follow your curiosity rather than follow your passion. And I
Mm,
heard that quote from someone on LinkedIn at one point. I think it was Eric Gonzalez. He put it in one of the posts. He said, follow your curiosity rather than follow your passion. And the reason why I like that is because we often get told, follow your passion.
mm.
And as kids, we have to figure out what we want to do when we grow up. But how would we know if we haven't tried it yet?
Yeah.
And I think that following your passion makes you stuck in this one idea of what you want to do. So for me, perhaps it was becoming a composer as my passion. If I was so
Hmm.
stuck on that idea, I would never explore anything else. And I would feel
Yeah.
like this is my fit. I have to make this work when it wasn't. And curiosity, on the other hand, lets you explore around your North Star. So if you
Mm,
understand your greater why, then you can find different paths around it. And where I am now, I feel like this is a great way to follow my North Star just in a different way. Maybe
yeah.
it'll change in a few years. That's okay with me. I don't
Hmm.
think this is my permanent place, but right now it's what feels the most right.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like you're dropping so many gems and we just started. That was a great answer. Apologies for that.
No
That
worries.
was a great answer. And it really stuck with me when you said passion versus curiosity, because I don't think I've ever put those two in a different bucket. I always thought, you're curious about things that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
And you're right, we're kind of, or we put this pressure on ourselves, and even the society does, oh, figure out what you're passionate about and go pursue it. And I study criminal justice. So I thought that was my passion. And you're right, if we get so stuck in what we think we're passionate about in that moment, it sounds like we put ourselves in the box. And even though passion is supposed to feel like, oh, it's so liberating because you're pursuing your passion, but it doesn't, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound like you are being liberated or you feel free, you feel confined by the chains that you have created around your passion. And that speaks volume.
Mhm.
So how do you keep chasing your curiosity when you're going to fail? Because it sounds like you're going to fail multiple times to
Yeah.
get to where you want to be. So how did you do that?
I think another way that I like looking at it is a reversal of the common idiom that goes practice makes perfect. Instead, I
Hmm.
like to think of it as practice makes progress.
Hmm.
So I don't try to be perfect ever. Right now,
Yeah.
I teach communication, presentation, and storytelling, but I'm not perfect. There's
Hmm.
still, I want to learn and more I can learn.
Yeah.
And I want to keep progressing. I want to keep growing. I think that when we think about being perfect and having everything figured out, going back to the idea of following your passion,
Hmm.
that makes us stuck. And I like to approach life in general in terms of following all those different avenues I can go, keeping an open mind
Yeah.
and saying, how can I continue to grow? If I've stopped growing here, maybe it's time to go somewhere else
Hmm.
because I'm more than just one thing.
Yeah. That's that's so true. You are more than just one thing. And I'm going to tie it back to this podcast. For me, it wasn't necessarily, interviewing professionals just to learn about what they do at work. It was more about who you are as a person. It's beyond what you do at just, at your work. Not saying that that's not important, but it's a part of who you are, but not who you are. So I like that you echoed that and you emphasize on that as well. Tell me a little bit about, because you mentioned when you got into data, when you were doing the projects, you said you were able to prove your worth. Did
Hmm.
that come from something, you feeling the need that you have to prove your worth in order to be successful?
I felt that need very intensely at the beginning of my data
Hmm.
career, that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And whatever the cause might be, I felt like I needed to do it. when I
Hmm.
started my job, even though they had accepted me, they said, hey, we think you fit all the criteria. You're the right person for this. Out of
Yeah.
all the applicants, we chose you. I still feel like I needed to prove that they were right in
Hmm.
choosing me, that they didn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I remember I would be given the task to learn, let's say, a new programming language to help code something for a website. And I wanted to prove I could do it.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'll learn it. And to impress people, I would spend the 10 hours the previous night learning it and come in and say I can do it. That was completely unnecessary, but I needed to show that I could be better than what I felt I was, that I
Hmm.
never felt I was good enough to be comfortable. And
Yeah.
I always felt I needed to get someone's external validation to feel like I belonged. And perhaps this is how our society often corners us into this kind of
Hmm.
perception. When we're going through school, our mark of success is getting a good grade, for example. So we need that external
Yeah.
validation to graduate.
Yeah.
And we we're stuck in this kind of cycle of having other people tell us that we're good so that we feel good. And I
Hmm.
think what I struggled with as an adult, what I still struggle with, is finding value just in myself and not requiring other people to tell me that I'm
Hmm.
good enough to feel good enough. So
Wow.
it's something I still struggle with, but what I've learned to cope with it is one thing, which is I try to remind myself a lot about the positive things I've done in addition to all the perhaps negative feedback that I've received.
Hmm.
So what happens in so many of our minds is we fixate on the criticisms and the mistakes and the
Yeah.
failures. And then even if we've done a lot of good, we forget about it.
It
So
just goes out the memory.
exactly. And what's helped me overcome imposter syndrome is reminding myself, yeah, I might have made a mistake. Maybe I messed up there, but hey, look at all those other times I did a really fantastic job.
Yeah.
And journaling that down, writing it down, putting it down on paper and making it concrete, that's what's helped me a
Hmm.
lot with overcoming those feelings.
Yeah. And like not feeling the need, like you said, like to prove my worth, but it still lingers. Especially, I remember I had this when I first started any new job. It's like, oh, they
Mm,
hired me. I want to make sure they know they didn't make a mistake so I don't get fired the
yeah.
next day. Is that, well, now you're an entrepreneur, so I don't think you struggle with necessarily proving your worth to your employer, but perhaps that comes up when you are, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that comes up when someone hires you or a
Mm-hmm.
new, you have a new data professional reaching out to you saying, hey, I'm struggling with my storytelling skills or presentation skills. I would like to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that come up for you?
It used to come up a lot.
Hmm.
And I'd say what also used to come up a lot is whenever I would post on LinkedIn. It's
Oh,
just a scary place
oh,
sometimes because I feel like social media and the internet, it can bring out the best and the worst of people sometimes because we don't have to be concerned with people's reactions when we say something. So
oh,
if someone were to say a really horrible, let's say, comment on a post that I put out, happens,
hmm,
they don't have to fear the repercussions of that. It's sort of like when you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off and then you yell at them from inside your armored vehicle and it's okay. No one, you're not going to be hurt. And the same thing happens on social media. We're protected in our little isolated
hmm.
bubbles. We can say whatever we want. And we forget that there's a person on the other side of the screen. So social
Yeah.
media and LinkedIn has definitely been something I've struggled with in terms of proving my worth and not taking all those negative comments too seriously.
Yeah. Because as you mentioned before, those negative comments, they stick out more than the positives do. Even though you recognize and you appreciate the positive comments and the positive engagement that you get, it's like, but that one
Yeah.
comment, that really got me, that hurt me. And I like that you said you used to struggle with it and you've gotten better at it. So is there a
Mm-hmm.
specific thing? I know you said journaling really helped you and trying to
Mm-hmm.
remember what are some positive impacts that you've made in your career on other people. Is there any other specific, I guess a habit or yeah, that you implement in your life to, I guess, overcome like the imposter syndrome or those doubts that keep coming up?
Mm-hmm. It was a flow chart I saw on LinkedIn posted by someone. I forgot exactly who, but it
Mm,
went something like at the very top of the flow chart, it's this flow chart to determine how you process negative feedback. And at the top it
mm.
said, do you know this person? And no, then don't worry about it. If you do, then let's follow the tree. So
Mm,
let's say you do know this person. Did they put their comment in a constructive way?
mm,
No, then don't worry about it. They're
mm,
not trying to help you. They're just trying to put you down. So don't recognize that. Don't give that
Yeah.
power. And then the next branch of the tree would go, do you agree with their feedback?
Mm.
Yes, then perhaps there's something I can change. Maybe a small thing I can change the next time. If no, I don't agree with it, then you can't please everybody.
Yeah.
So thinking about those kinds of steps and thinking, yeah, I don't have to take it all so personally. Maybe there's
Yeah.
some small things I can change, but it's not a reflection of me in my entirety. That's what
Yeah.
helped me a lot.
One question that came up for me, and I think it came up when I talked to you about this podcast specifically. How does communication tie into confidence? Can you communicate well without feeling confident?
I recently put out an image, I can send it to you
Mm,
as well,
thanks.
where it's this kind of flywheel and it goes confidence and competence and this going around and around. So
Yeah.
where do you start? And my response is you start with action. That's the
Mm,
spark that ignites the fire that lets you keep going around it. It's when you act that you build the competence in your skills and that builds your confidence. But it's also when you act that you build your confidence and that in turn will inspire you
mm,
to build your skills, to build your competence. So I believe it all starts with action, really taking the steps to grow. And for
mm.
communication, what I recommend people do to take that action is to record themselves. It's one of the most uncomfortable things to do. And
Yeah.
we all hate how we sound on the phone, how we
Yeah.
look on camera. But by recording yourself, you see how the whole world sees you and you see how the whole world hears and listens to you.
Mm,
And by doing that, you take the action to say, okay, I've recorded myself. Now I can watch back, see how I can improve, and go through that flywheel. So I believe
yeah.
that confidence and competence are intertwined, and it really starts with just taking that first step of action.
Wow. And it's like keep pushing yourself to keep taking those action in order to feel confident about what you're doing. And if you keep doing it, you're going to build the competence of whatever you're doing.
Mhm.
So how did that play a role when you transitioned, when you left the corporate, when you left your job? I'm not sure if you quit, but you quit, you're like, I'm done. I'm going to start my own business. So what was that like? What thoughts, went through your head? Was it a consistent action to build a competence and the confidence to start?
It really all started with LinkedIn for me, actually.
Hmm.
And it started that flywheel because the action I took was posting my first post. It was the scariest thing. I was afraid all the vultures would come for me and then
Oh,
nobody would like what I put out. But I actually got a lot of positive feedback and engagement on early posts. And I said, hey, this is something people care about. Maybe this is something that's not talked about very often, that maybe I have something valuable to contribute.
yeah.
I started posting while I had my last corporate job.
Hmm.
And as I continued to do it, going through that flywheel of consistent action, I built my confidence. I said, hey, I am talking about something people care about. I have some knowledge of this subject. Let me keep doing it. And I started building that confidence and competence continuously. And I reached a point where I said, hey, maybe I can take on a client. So on the side, I tried to help people. And I said, I can help you with these communication and presentation and storytelling skills. And I got even more positive feedback and engagement. I saw the transformation I could help them undergo
Yeah.
from feeling unconfident in their communication to now feeling confident. I said, wow, I can do this. And people are receiving it well. So maybe I can take this to the next level. And that's when I decided to leave that last position and try and
Hmm.
make this happen full time. I reached a point where I said, I can keep going having this on the side, but if I give this the full throttle, if I put all my energy into it, I can really make this grow quickly. And
Yeah.
that's what I decided to do. I have no regrets about that. I'm really happy that I decided to
I'm
take that
glad.
leap. And it let me post much more consistently on LinkedIn to the point where it was daily. And I saw, of course, a mixture of positive and negative comments along the way with more visibility. But I saw that most of the time, people were really receiving this well and that I could make an impact. And that I said to myself, I can do this. I can make it work.
You're doing it. Not that you can, you are doing
Exactly. Exactly.
it. And I remember, I'm not sure when you had started posting, but I remember connecting with you when you were still relatively new to the space in
Yeah.
terms of posting on LinkedIn. And I've seen your growth and I've seen your consistency. And I've said this and I will say it again. I really admire it. And I love the topic that you share. And you're right, it's not talked about enough. And we need more people to voice the importance of communication, not just in your professional journey, it's also important in your personal life too. Knowing
Mm-hmm.
how to communicate, that's going to get you very far. And if you can't communicate,
Absolutely.
that's going to hold you back. And I think this was one of your posts that you had mentioned, or maybe one of your videos where you mentioned someone didn't get a promotion even though they've been in a role for maybe
Mm-hmm.
a decade. and didn't get
Yeah.
a promotion because of the lack of communication skills. Tell me a little bit more about that because I don't know where I'm recalling this from.
Yeah, that was a shocker for me. It was a
Mm.
client I had spoken to, and he had said to me, I have not gotten a promotion for 15 years
Oof.
because my boss doesn't think I have good communication skills. I said, that's incredible. That's
Wow.
I I felt so bad for this person and for people who feel that way
Mm.
because communication is a blocker. And there's just the reason why I pursue this is there's not training resources for this in abundance.
Yeah.
And I think it's the reason why I chose this space as well, technical professionals, data professionals, because I believe we're some of the most skilled people in the world who can really make a difference.
Yeah.
And I want to empower those people to make that difference by helping them become confident communicators. That last mile, as you mentioned before, is the most
Mm.
important part, because if you can't communicate the value of your work, it won't have value whatsoever.
Oof.
So this person that I had spoken to, and other examples of clients and people in my past career, there was one person I worked with, and he was one of the most skilled data engineers I knew.
Mm.
He could take anything I threw at him and get it done in less than an hour.
Wow.
It was phenomenal what he was capable of. But his communication skills, he was very unconfident. He was very,
Mm.
let's say, on the more introverted side. He wouldn't speak up a lot in meetings. When he did, and when he did need to present, it would not have the impact that it could because he wasn't targeting what, let's say, the manager needed to hear. He was talking about what he did and why it
Mm.
mattered to him, not what the other
Mm.
person needed to understand. And for that reason, I believe he was eventually moved to a different team because I feel the manager didn't see that value he was providing to ours.
Mm.
And I felt it was those moments where I said, yeah, this is something that so many people want to work on, don't know how to work on, and I want to see if I can help them with it.
Yeah. So is that, I know with the music background, right? I'm not sure if that was the major component for you that helped you be good at it. So how did you get better at it? Because I don't think you just, I feel like it's a technique that you have to learn. Communication
Mm-hmm.
is just not me sitting there and talking to you because there's probably a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things that I'm doing right now that I could improve on. So how did you learn that to be able to teach that to other people?
It was through a lot of mentors that I'm very grateful for in my life. I remember there was one mentor I had in high school who said to me something very similar to what I just expressed, which was they told me, they said, you are very skilled in chemistry,
Yeah.
but if you cannot communicate about it well, you won't be recognized for it
Mm.
and you will lose out on opportunities. So I was in the position of many of my clients back then. And they said to me, I want to help you with this. I want
Mm.
you really have so much potential. I want to make sure you realize all of it. So mentors like that who taught me how to not just list facts, but tell a story, how to
Mm.
make sure that I'm thinking about what the other person needs, not just talking about what I care about. All those little things added up over time to get me to where I am today. And I remember the moment where I felt like I had partially made it was when a manager during a performance review had said to me, they said, it was kind of like an elaboration on what my chemistry teacher had said. They said, you're really skilled in this area, but what also makes you unique is your ability to communicate well. So I
Oof.
feel like I had grown, I had
Yeah.
achieved what I wanted. They said, what makes you unique is your ability to not just do the technical work, but communicate with the business in a way they care about and understand. And they said, don't lose that because no
Mm.
matter what you end up doing, whether it's in this field or not, that's a skill that's essential for life in professional or personal
Wow.
areas. So I had another manager say that to me a few years later, and I said, "Okay, I guess I've made it somewhat, and
Hmm.
and now I feel confident that I can help other people with it." That
Yeah.
was my journey.
Few more questions when it comes
Yeah,
to you being on your entrepreneur journey. What's something that you've learned about yourself?
I've learned how powerful it can be to be confident in your communication. And as an
Mm.
example of that, when I started one of my previous data jobs, it was at the beginning of the pandemic,
Mm.
and we all went virtual.
Yeah.
We didn't have cameras on; we just did
Mm.
audio. It was very interesting, a very interesting time. We were figuring out how we're going to do this new way of
Mm.
working. And eventually, over time, we started saying, hey, it would be great if we come on video now because we're trying
Mm.
to foster this sense of team culture and interconnectedness. I never turned my camera on. I never wanted
Oh,
to. And
really?
I was at a point in my life where I didn't feel confident in my communication.
Mm.
I didn't feel confident in myself. I felt I really don't feel this adds any value by
Mm.
putting myself on camera. I didn't in some sense, I felt some sense of shame that I was in this spot that I really didn't love, in the
Mm.
sense that I had worked in data for a while for that stability, that financial stability, but it really wasn't the best fit for me in terms of that ikigai idea of
Mm.
I'm fulfilling myself in all these other areas.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was an imposter by doing this. I was living someone else's life. Let's say I was living
Wow.
perhaps my parents' dream to have a
Oof.
stable job. And the reason why that comes up is I remember having conversations with them where I'd say, yeah, I have this job, I make this much, it's this great company.
Yeah.
And I was looking for external validation from them in those moments. And I
Mm.
realized that even when I got it, I still felt empty. And that's when I realized
That hurt.
I'm living someone else's life.
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't feel confident coming on camera in that company, because I didn't feel myself. I didn't feel
Mm.
confident in who I was presenting myself as. But now, having made this journey in communication for myself,
Mm.
I come on camera every single time, even in meetings where the other person does not, because
Mm.
I'm proud now of who I am. I'm proud now of what I say. I really
Wow.
believe in it. And I no longer feel that sense of shame.
That is so powerful. And it's just so powerful. There was a quote, a book that I tend to pick up whenever I'm feeling stuck or just I want to read something. I think it's called 101 Essays, dot. I can't remember the full name, but I think when you search 101 essays, there was one quote in this book that really stuck out to me. They're like three versions of yourself, right? It's the one that you present to the world. And I am definitely butchering this, so please fact check me, but this is the sense that I got. There's a version of yourself that you present to the world. And then there's a version of yourself who you truly are. And whenever that's at conflict, it's due to shame because you're not ready to be that person that you internally are, but you're presenting this image of yourself to other people because that feels more comfortable. And until you're able to, truly bring out your true self is when you overcome that shame. And that
Mm-hmm.
is so powerful because I don't even think a lot of people admit that.
Yeah.
And you just sit in that discomfort and I will argue that that feeling might even be seen as imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like, oh, you're just not in the right space or you're just that there's something else that's calling your name. It's more of like, oh no, I just need to work on this skill or I just need to learn this. And once I learn this, I'll feel better. Did you also try to see if that was the feeling? If maybe it was just the imposter syndrome, you have to go learn something else and
Mm-hmm.
then you'll feel better about yourself.
Yeah, I that is a very powerful statement from
Yeah.
that reading that you mentioned. I think that for me, one thing I saw on LinkedIn recently about imposter syndrome was that there were two things. One is that it often comes up when we skip the beginner phase of our
Mm.
learning, where we jump straight to wanting to be an expert, but we don't go through the hoops of trying to learn it. And the second thing was that imposter syndrome often arises when we we don't feel there are areas that we've mastered. And
Mm.
perhaps in a more positive sense, we can use that to fill in those areas of growth.
Hmm.
When imposter syndrome becomes toxic is when we feel that gap exists, but we feel it's insurmountable and we can't do anything to get there. And then we feel in this perpetual cycle of not feeling good enough. But what I tried to do to tackle my feeling of imposter syndrome was, let's take that gap I've identified and let's break it down into those small manageable pieces. Let me
Hmm.
tackle those one at a time. And one
Mm.
book that impacted me for that concept was Atomic Habits.
Oh, I
And I
have
think it's
it.
by James Clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that book is all about the idea that you can't set these lofty goals for yourself that you can't achieve, because that's just demotivational. You need
Mm.
to break it down into tasks that you can achieve. For example, if our New Year resolution is to lose 20 pounds, maybe that's too much of a goal. Instead of that, break it down into, I will go on a walk for 10 minutes every day and then build that
Hmm.
out to 20 minutes a day. And that incremental progress is really where the growth happens, rather than trying to shoot for our end goal too fast.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. It's to break down those goals and instead of putting a major picture in front of you that you're just running after and skipping those beginner phases, it's and I think part of it's also accepting that you're not going to be an expert. Even
Mm-hmm.
people who've been in this field for like years and years, they also
Yeah.
talk about it. And I think that for me personally, that helped me seeing it more of a realistic lens, knowing that I'm going to master SQL. No, I'm not. I'm not going to. I will still have to Google certain things, and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's like understanding the fundamentals of concepts that you're trying to learn. I'm going to go back to what you had
Yeah.
mentioned was your parents.
Mhm.
How, I'm not sure, like your relationship with your parents or like the conversations that you may have had when you said, "Hey, mom and dad, I left my job. I'm going to pursue this." Was that a conversation that you had, or was that something that you had anticipated to talk to your parents about as well? What was that like?
I'd say that they were incredibly supportive with that
Mm,
transition.
that's amazing.
And it was a wonderful thing because coming from a, let's say, a traditional Chinese cultural background, East Asian background, where
Hmm.
what's prized is that idea of a stable financial job, especially for immigrants who've come to the United
Oof.
States.
Yep.
To defy that and choose something that is completely the opposite of that expectation is scary for myself and for them. But they recognized, because I had opened up to them about these
Mm,
feelings I had of perhaps the imposter syndrome, but also that sense of shame that I wasn't
mm,
where I wanted to be. They understood that I needed to do something different, that I had achieved the markers of success in their eyes, in their
yeah.
mind. And now he's going to be fine. He has it figured out. He is capable enough that if this doesn't go as well as planned, he'll pivot to something else. So they had confidence that I could make it work no matter what.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for that.
That's amazing. And I think it's so important to have people in your life. And I will say a lot of times, even I feel privileged, and I'm glad you have supportive parents too. And I know not everyone has supportive parents, especially when it comes to taking this leap of faith. But it's so important to have a circle, even if it's not your parents, that believe in you, especially in those moments that you don't. And it's okay because we all have those moments, even when from the outside you see, us being quote unquote successful, and you're measuring your success based on our success or someone else's success. That's something we'll talk about. It's good to have people in your circle again to show you that you are valuable, show you that you are capable, and then you will get it done. And I know earlier in our conversation you had mentioned that you were comparing yourself to success of other people. Is that something that still comes up for you, especially after you transition as an entrepreneur?
It used to come up a lot,
Mm,
especially at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. I would feel this sense that I wasn't good enough again because
mm,
I see, especially on LinkedIn, for example, people with vastly higher numbers of followers or
yeah.
connections and posts and engagement. And I thought, what am I doing wrong that I'm not getting that yet? And I had to remind myself that this is the beginning of my journey. I don't know how long it took them to get there. And I don't even know what their goals are. Have they reached their own goals?
Yeah.
So it's about remembering that the best metric is not other people, but rather myself. So there's this quote, I think it goes that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
And I think it actually goes deeper than that. I think that comparison is the thief of self-belief. And
Mm,
it's a more kind of insidious, toxic consequence that if you compare yourself to others, you stop believing in yourself because you need that external validation. So I
wow.
said, I have to stop comparing myself to other people. Let's compare myself to past versions of myself. So where was I a
Mm,
year ago? I was in a job. I was stable financially, but I wasn't where I wanted to be, let's say.
yeah.
Now, 1 year later, I'm an entrepreneur doing what I love. That's an amazing transformation. I should be
That
proud of
is.
that. So
Yeah.
I try to have, of course, if I slip up, we're all not capable of sustaining that indefinitely. I compare myself to others, but I try to remind myself in those moments, I catch myself in that self-awareness and say, step away from that, recognize the emotion that just happened there. I felt that sense that I wasn't as good as them,
Mm,
and compare myself to past versions of myself to validate, yeah, I've come a long way. I'm on my own personal journey.
I love that. And I like that you emphasize that even though you struggle with it in the past, it still comes up. We're not
Mm-hmm.
perfect and we're human beings. It does come up. And it's just setting healthy habits, catching yourself when you're doing that, calling yourself out when you're doing that, and realizing that you're on your own journey. You're not walking someone else's path, and nor should you, because that's not your story. That's not something you got to look back at. Hey, so and so did this, so I did this, because that's not really. It doesn't really sound like a inspirational or a powerful story to tell anyone. I see it as, is this a story that I want to tell my kids? No, I
Yeah,
don't.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So do you feel, I know you said you still struggle with that at times. When you are working with your clients, what kind of fears or what kind of gaps are you noticing when it comes to their communication skills? And because I know public speaking is not everyone's favorite thing to do,
Right.
and some people are maybe even paralyzed by it. So have you worked with someone who, may feel even paralyzed by that fear of public speaking? And how do you help people overcome that or even overcome the doubt, the confident lack of confidence? What does that process look like?
One of the most common things I notice for especially data professionals
Mm-hmm.
is a tendency to include a lot of detail and overcomplicate. And I had two clients recently who expressed that challenge to me. One was a manager who said to me, I love talking about the detail. I
Mm.
love starting at the beginning, walking people through all these things I find interesting and taking them on that adventure with me. I love giving that kind of performance, but they got feedback from their manager that it was not concise enough, that it went too much into the weeds,
Mm.
that communication was something they needed to work on. Another client said to me, another manager said, they also love talking about the detail. They caught themselves in the stakeholder meeting. They had done some analytics
Mm.
and they were going deep into the weeds of the process they used to get all the numbers because that's what they love doing. That's what we as data professionals, that's why we went into this field, because we love those processes and that
Yep.
detail. And we forget that our audience doesn't often.
That's why they
So
hired you.
exactly. So what I do to help clients through that kind of communication exercise to improve those skills is reversing the table. So often what
Mm.
happens in presentation, we think about ourselves, what we want to say, how to make it
Mm.
good. We need to flip the table around and think about what does the other person need to hear? What do they need from us? It's not about us, it's about them. And
Yeah.
that's also a way to overcome feelings of imposter syndrome, perhaps, and also anxiety for public speaking. Because when
Mm.
we keep thinking about me, we think about how do I look good? Am I sounding right? Am I slipping up on my
Yeah.
words? We're going to be stuck in this feeling of anxiety. But if we
Yeah.
start thinking about the other person, how can we help them? It becomes about them, not about us. So that's a major mindset shift that I help my clients with.
Mm.
And it, one way I like to phrase it is instead of this kind of supermodel-esque thinking about ourselves and us as important, it's about being a teacher and
Mm.
seeing how we can serve the other person in the
Yeah.
best way. So that's one important thing that I hope to convey to all my clients.
I think that's a great call out. It's a lot of times when we are going up there, it's like, I want to make sure I look good. I want to make sure I speak this way. I look this way, or I get all the things out that I thought was really, really exciting. And we tend to overlook that we're not talking to ourselves, we're talking to an audience. We need to think about our audience. And I think that's so important when it comes to communication. And it's something that you've talked about too, right? Know your audience, know who
Mhm.
you're talking to. If you're talking to tech professionals, they love it, right? They would love that you
Exactly.
go into details. They would love to, oh, what code did you use? Oh, you ran into a code error and then you have to go fix it, all that stuff. But your stakeholders who don't tech come from a tech background, they just want you to, present the findings because that's exciting for them. They can make business decisions to drive their team in the right direction. That's exciting for them, not necessarily what code you used or what program that you ended up using. So knowing your audience is very important, and keeping them at the forefront is highly important.
Exactly.
Now, tell me a little bit about how that ties into your personal life, not just yours, but people that you teach.
Yeah.
Communication, being an entrepreneur, growing so much, and I really do admire what you do a lot. How does that go into your personal life? How has that helped you be better, show up better for the people in your life?
I think communication is one of the most important things we can work on in our lives. And I'm
Mhm.
not just saying that because it's what I teach and what I love, but I
Of
really
course he's not.
fundamentally believe that. And the reason why I say that is I had one client recently who I spoke to, and one of the exercises we went through was I asked her, because she has a lot of anxiety when it comes to speaking and
Hmm.
imposter syndrome, and I asked her, what are areas that you really admire about yourself,
Hmm.
to encourage that idea of positive affirmation. And she was talking off the top of her head. And one thing that she said really made me feel so sad to hear.
Hmm.
She said, I'm a very genuine person, but nobody cares about that. And I said, that's something I want to better understand. And
Yeah.
she went into more detail. She said she tries to be kind, she tries to be generous, but all of the examples of leadership in her life are not that way. They
Hmm.
are people who get results and perhaps are very aggressive in getting them, and that's why they can get them.
Wow.
But she did not see examples of generous leadership in her life, and she felt, what am I doing being generous or genuine when that's not what other people really care about? And I
Wow.
said, this is a moment where it is perhaps the environment in which you're in that cultivates that kind of perspective. I said, perhaps in the environment you're in, you're surrounded by a lot of people that have that kind of persona in leadership. But then I brought up a past example she had told me in a previous meeting. I said, didn't you have a manager in the same organization who was very kind to you? who was very genuine and who cared about you as a person. She said, yeah, I guess so. And in that moment, it's really about that fixation on negative things over positive ones. So
Hmm.
we tell ourselves a story about the world. In her case, it's that nobody cares about genuineness. And because we have this story in our mind, anything that contradicts it, we throw away because it doesn't support that story. So
Yeah.
I told her it's perhaps the environment you're in, but also the way that you look at that environment. So
Hmm.
remember the positive examples that you have in your life. And going back to your question about how communication has helped me in my personal life, I believe that genuineness, her answer, is really all we have at the end of the day. Yes, we can create great products. Yes, we can get results, but it's our genuineness that I believe is really the most important quality. Because, for example, if we were to lie to someone, let's say that we're on a sales call and they're trying to sell us something, they're trying to sell us a program where we can transform into something that we want, and we tell them a lie. We say, I don't think I'm ready for this, when actually we think we are, we have enough money, but we say that because we think it'll get them off our back. We told a lie
Hmm.
through our words. By doing that, we have made a different reality more true than ours, that we don't believe in ourselves in our reality.
Hmm.
And I think that being genuine is really one of the attributes we should strive to be, because by being genuine, we prize our words and our thoughts and our ideas and our authenticity, let's say. So I believe that it's genuineness that comes in the form of effective communication that really helped me personally. I started
Hmm.
to realize that when I wasn't good and effective at communicating, I was, in a sense, lying to the world because I wasn't effectively translating my ideas to other people. And I like to think of it like our thoughts are this white light in our head, kind of like the sunlight. But
Hmm.
a prism is what lets you see the individual colors inside of it. In the same way, our thoughts are this white light, and our words are the prisms we use to bring that into the world.
Wow.
And most of us, we stick to using this low resolution prism that creates, let's say, 8-bit images on the world of what we want to say. We tell lies, or we don't say what we mean, or we don't say it effectively. And that leaves the world for the worst. By being effective with our communication, by being
Hmm.
confident in our communication, by creating better prisms for our thoughts, we can bring ourselves into the world in the most impactful way. I think that's one of the most important things we can do as human beings, is be genuine to each other, and also to be genuine in the way of communicating effectively.
That was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. And I wish it was, you put it so elegantly. I struggled. Like, how would I be able to implement it so beautifully into my life, right? Professionally, it requires a different type of communication style. When I'm personally like talking to someone, then it requires a different level of communication style. But it's so true that when you're showing up, you're just showing up as your true self, as your genuine self. And in order to translate your thoughts into something that the other people can understand and understand where you stand, what's going on, it's being able to translate that through language, through communication, through your words. And that's so powerful. So everyone who's listening, please go check out his channel, because definitely we all need to work on communications. One question before we go into a
Yeah,
latest bit that I've added, rapid fire, which I'm really
cool.
trying to turn into rapid because it's never rapid. What's so important about finding your voice?
I think that, to add on to that analogy I
Hmm.
was saying before about the importance of being genuine and using words to bring that genuineness into the world, there's another phrase that goes, eyes are a window to the soul.
Mm.
But I believe that your voice is really its most intimate breath, in the sense that you can really understand a person when you hear their words, when they're spoken genuinely and authentically. And I struggled with this throughout my life, and it's the reason why I wanted to become a coach to help other people with it. Is I
Mm.
struggled with feeling comfortable letting my genuine, authentic voice be brought into the world. I
Mm.
remember as a kid, I was probably the most shy and introverted student in the class. Never speak
Yeah.
in
Wow.
those kinds of settings. I was very unconfident. To the example I gave before, my chemistry teacher, she believed in my skill, but not in my ability to communicate about it.
Mm.
And I thought a lot about that to myself. I said, why am I this way?
Yeah.
Is it because I don't believe in what I have to say? Or is it that I don't know enough? And I realized it was because I wasn't confident enough that when I spoke, that people would want to hear it, that it would be valuable to other people, that it was worth putting out, similar to the example of me not wanting to put on my camera in that past job because I didn't feel like I was showing up authentically. I believe that if you know how to use your unique, authentic voice well, that you feel confident using it, that it's the most liberating and empowering thing in the world, that you can walk into any setting, in this kind of podcast interview, in this kind of, in a meeting at work, in a presentation, walking out on a public speaking stage, that you feel confident that every single word you say is going to touch someone, is going to mean something to someone. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed in my clients and others I've worked with, that really makes them feel like they belong and that they mean something.
Yeah. And I think we've emphasized a lot throughout this episode is to find that confidence in yourself. And to do that, just get the repetition and take action in order to build the confidence and build the competency in anything that you're trying to learn. This has been a wonderful podcast. This has been a great interview.
This was awesome. And
we will do rapid fire.
Yeah.
You can't leave yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what's one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? And it's probably something that we've already discussed, but
I would say be kind to myself. And there was one time where I was trying to establish my music career. There was a really famous person that I was about to meet. And I remember rushing up to them, introducing myself, and then running away out of fear. And I said to myself, I was so critical of myself after that, but my current self would tell my younger self, hey, it's okay. You actually went up there. You didn't just hide in the audience. So give yourself credit for that.
That's so sweet. Hopefully you get to meet them again so you don't run away.
Hope so. I hope so.
What's your all-time favorite quote?
It would be, I believe it's by Stephen Covey, and it's seek first to, I'm going to butcher it, but it basically, the idea of it is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. So understand the other person first, speaking to our idea of knowing our audience before we actually seek to bring our ideas forward. And
that's beautiful. What's one habit that you've implemented daily that contributes to your success?
I try to go through that exercise of positive affirmations for myself, where, yes, there's a lot of negativity, perhaps real or perceived. And I try to tell myself, there are things that I've done well, compare myself to past versions of myself and say, you are the best version of yourself you can be right now.
I love that. What's one thing that you're still trying to overcome or recently overcame? So could be something on your bucket list or anything along this lines.
I'd say imposter syndrome, and that tendency to compare is still something I work through. I've largely overcome the most toxic parts of it, but I do slip up, and it's something I'm working on.
Social media.
Yeah, social media.
Ooh. If you had to pick one thing that you would want people to focus on when they are, in front of the audience and just ready to speak, what would it be?
When people go on these large stages or even small stages, they often get the stage fright because there's so many people looking at them. And my advice to that would be speak to one person at a time. Sometimes people are completely comfortable in one-on-one conversations, but then they go into these public speaking arenas and they're all shell-shocked. And I say, treat it like a one-on-one conversation with every single person, just taking turns to different people. And that will help you overcome a lot of that anxiety.
That's so true. For those listening, definitely try that, because I try that and it definitely helps me. Anything else you would like to share with the audience that we did not cover today or I didn't get a chance to ask you?
Yeah. If anyone is interested in these kinds of communication skills, in enhancing their presentation storytelling ability for future leadership roles, or even to get really good at their current position, what I currently do is I have my online course where I teach those things, coaching, and also workshops I do for teams. So if anybody wants to get in touch about those things, or just to casually chat, I love meeting new people, then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or check out my website, thehiddenspeaker.com.
Yeah, that was going to be the last statement too.
Sweet.
Where can people find you?
Yeah.
No, that's great. So I will put the links to your YouTube, to your LinkedIn, and to your course in the show description, in the description box. Everything will be linked there, so they can always find you there. And like you said, you love meeting new people, so hopefully they will go ahead and connect with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much more about you, and I think I'm going to be better at communication right after this call too.
Thanks so much, Denali, for the opportunity. This was awesome. Thank you.
Of course. I'm trying to find how to stop recording. Oh, it's on the top.